Thank you for asking us.
We are selling something very, very dangerous, very, very exciting, and something that I believe is part of a powerful new future. But it takes people who are willing to go out and sell it. I'm a social entrepreneur. Now I could get up here all day long and talk about the businesses I've built. They're all badass as shit. But I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm here to use the businesses I've built to talk about a bigger, bolder idea. They are examples. I am one of many. And the last thing I do is feed people. I change minds through the way I feed people. That's what interests me. I'm more interested in influence. As I love to say, even though we have to get into the nuts and bolts of dollars, I'm more interested in change than dollars. But no bucks, no Buck Rogers. You got to make your business run. But if I can, I'd like to do a little bit of history thing that fascinates me because it speaks to where we're at right now. Because I believe that there is a deeper, more profound hunger in America than the physical hunger that we're here to talk about. And that the food movement in America has very little to do with food. There is this deeper hunger to tribe up again. People want to belong. They want to be part of something bigger. And they're looking for like-minded people. They're ready to sign up for something new. I say this constantly, man. Americans are they're very decent, they are very kind, they are incredibly generous, but most people are afraid. They don't want to talk about race. They don't want to talk about prison. They don't want to talk about addiction. They definitely don't want to talk about mental health. But the reality is that's where we have to go. So to a certain extent, I urge you all to realize whether you think you're a for-profit, whether you think you're a non-profit, whether you're the glorious hybrid, we're all in the bravery business. It is our job to make people brave enough to sit down next to someone who looks different, who prays different, and share a meal. That is our job. And that is a huge undertaking. It is not easy. You could make a case that what we're building are Trojan horses. Don't forget, and I used to say this all the time, my beloved daughter Julia was so in love with Orlando Bloom, she could have just screamed. So I saw or heard the movie Troy relentlessly in our home. But what's wild about that, man, and people don't get this, man, that was not a 3-day romp. That was a 10-year siege. And quick history, and I love history, and I'm going to kind of riff into this. Agamemnon the king didn't do anything wrong. He did what everybody historically had done prior. It just didn't work. And it took Odysseus, a younger person, to suggest that they could take the same wood that they had been using for 10 years in the traditional way in which war was fought. And within one day they were inside it and they had victory because they set up a way in which instead of trying to push the gates open, they got the Trojans to open the gates for them. And that's what we do. It's our job to get Americans to open their minds and let new ideas in. And that's what I believe my business has all been. Now they look actually just like a functioning living, whether you want to call it a charity, a for-profit, a cafe, whatever. They all function. In fact, what got me going on this journey was as a young man, I saw the movie Casablanca. And all I wanted to do, the second I saw Rick's Cafe, was open a nightclub. That's all I wanted to do. Man, I was the guy, I was the kid, and there's some of them in the room I knew who took the word high in high school literally. I was a horrible student. I could not function. I didn't thrive in that environment. I could not wait to get out of high school. All I wanted to do was open a nightclub. In fact, I spent most of my nights, some of you can relate, I can't believe my father, they probably knew what I was doing, but I would come in and I'd be like, oh man, dude, I'm going to bed. And I was out the back door. And I was up at nightclubs in Washington, D.C., and I would sneak back in the morning. I'm surprised I never came home and found the door locked. But I lived, ate, and breathed nightclubs. Now what's important to get, though, is it wasn't about music. It wasn't about liquor. It wasn't about money. I was mesmerized by the power of music. I came up at a time in which we think America's divided. Now, dudes, America's always been divided. But 1968, You talk about a fucked up year, you know, seriously. Dr. King was murdered. Robert Kennedy was murdered. You know, there were serious body counts from Vietnam. You know, and Richard Nixon was about to win the election. It was a really horrific time. In fact, there's many people who thought the world was going to fall apart, but yet my parents, as much as they and their friends argued over politics, dude, you put on a Motown record, they all danced. And that, as a kid though, seriously, man, get this, I fucking dug on that so hard, because again, that notion, that music that said the exact same thing that Dr. King was talking about, music that said the same thing that Robert Kennedy was talking about, could get people to dance. So as a young kid, I was like, ding, music has power. And when I saw Casablanca, Rick's, like Seeds, like all of your cafe, Rick's was the kind of place where everybody in Casablanca went to Rick's. Everybody went there. Because they went there that if they just wanted the momentary freedom of a night out, if they just wanted to pretend that the world had not caved in on them, if they just wanted to pretend it was the town they were leaving, and that they were somehow back there, they could get that at Rick's. But man, if you wanted to get out of Casablanca, you went to Rick's too. It was a doorway to a freedom at two levels. The immediate freedom of a night out, but a deeper, more powerful freedom that was represented in the movie by the construct of getting to America. So to me, the combination of the power of the music and seeing a nightclub with a dual existence, you know, the idea that Rick's function, you know, if you can make a case, if you haven't seen the movie, you should, although I'm sure at this stage there are certain aspects of Casablanca that might be repulsive to a younger generation. But if you take out that and just focus on the love story, or frankly just the glorious relationship between Captain Renault and Rick, you had to imagine that the Captain Renault knew what was going on, but the point is, it was so cleverly disguised. You know, Rick's just looked like a highly functioning nightclub. But that's what I did. I ran nightclubs because I really wanted to purposely set out to develop shows in the nation's capital that would take people in positions of power and give them, through the subtle art of music, theater, art, comedy. And again, look what Jon Stewart did every night with comedy. Yeah. You know, I wanted to use that deliberately. Now, I was on that journey, and I was good at what I did. But as you all may well know, as much as you want to do shows in the front of the house, if you don't have a tight back of the house, you can't afford all that glorious stuff. So I had to learn, and again, learning wasn't my bag. I had to learn back of the house. I had to learn inventory. I had to learn all of these things. That revealed one very interesting aspect that somehow came to play on a night I went out to feed poor people in the nation's capital. Because like many people in the 1980s, I bore witness to a frightening explosion of homelessness in every American city, but none more poignant, I think, than Washington, D.C., where behind the White House, in front of the Capitol, all throughout the federal enclave, men, women, and at times even families were camped out, huddled on steam grates, just trying to stay warm. I, like many people, worried and eventually went out on a truck to feed those men and women, but I ended up, metaphorically, if you won't mind me using your position here, serving a poor person across the table. In other words, there was a line of volunteers lined up to serve a line of poor people food that was purchased at a grocery store in Washington, D.C. Now again, besides the false divide of the table, which really, really hit me very early, and besides the fact that the side of the table I was on had an awning, and the side where the people were was out in the rain. And this notion, and I really want to drop a little truth bomb on you here. Charity is about the redemption of the giver, not the liberation of the receiver. Yep. And I know that's what we're trying to flip here, is this construct that if it's done well, and you all represent this so profoundly, if it's done well, both sides are liberated simultaneously. Amen. Both sides rise up in these situations. Thank you, my sister. I appreciate that. So I just came back a couple of weeks later because I, on the way home that night, had two little mini revelations. One, I knew how much food we threw away. Yeah. You know? And this was back in 1987. And there hadn't really been any studies back then, but I knew because a lot of my friends had gone to work in catering where you could make, frankly, pretty easy money. And I was about to say, I got to get my audiences correct. Sometimes you ask if people have worked in restaurants, I know you've all worked in restaurants. You got to work hard to make your tips in a restaurant. Caterers, you just walk around with a tray. Catering is great, but and a lot of my friends had left to make that, but they were lamenting about how much food they threw away at 2 o'clock in the morning because the party didn't have, half the people didn't show up. Now, the food had been purchased, but they were lamenting. So I thought, I knew how much food there was being thrown away. So I thought, wow, imagine if you could create a system based on FedEx. Again, it was a new business model then, so I decided, let's create a FedEx for food. Restaurants, hotels, universities, hospitals, farmers, if they could send their food to a central processing hub, you could feed more people better food for less money by what you could make out of all the random donations. But the real revelation was restaurants have jobs. Why don't we offer men and women a chance to come in off the street and be part of the solution versus this kind of insidious construct of people who are just in need of services? You know, again, that idea that everybody has a role to play, everybody has something to offer, everybody has a gift. A nonprofit doesn't try and fix the problem, it just reveals the truths that were there all along. So, like many of you all, I ran into the doubters. I developed a business plan. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't want to do it. That wasn't, I wanted to go around a nightclub. I just had this little idea that, again, more people, better food, less money, short the line by the way, serve the line. Restaurants get access to entry-level people, everybody wins. I thought it was a no-brainer, so I went to all the different charities saying, here's an idea, here's an idea. None of them would take it. And in fact, I've told this story many, many times. I was surprised how vehemently it was resisted. How much pushback I got from the very groups I assumed would have a by any means necessary culture about shortening the line. That almost willingness to dare everything. If they thought for 1 second it might get one person off the street, I'll try it. So I was shocked at the resistance. Similar to, I know what you all encounter with restaurant peers, with community peers, that sense of that won't work, and almost willingness and almost excitement about its flaws. But the one that I was unable, I was unprepared for, because I had, like any business person, when you develop your model, you have a whole set of your plan, how you're going to make payroll, how you're going to do all these things. I was prepared for a huge amount of the questions I'd get, but I was shocked to my core by a comment that was made, because I had assembled a bunch of the different charities to try and pitch this. And somebody raised their hand and said, look, Robert, we know you mean well. You're obviously well-intended, but you're naive to think restaurants will hire men and women who are addicts, who are off the street. And it's like, you've never worked in a restaurant. I say this all the time. It's like, man, restaurants are the island of misfits. I mean, you know, I know it sounds facetious, but I don't want to go over the top here. Man, literally, unless you're smoking crack while you're stirring the pipe, you can get a job in a restaurant. So, you know, my thing was like, no one's going to do this. And I swear, I think some of you all are in the same position I was. It's like, somebody should do this. You know, I can't just chalk it up to, fuck that. I just can't walk away saying, well, they, you know, da-da-da-da, I'm smart, they're dumb, and go back to doing what I was doing. We all have that crossroads where you have to kind of choose, which way am I going to go? And I have a special place in my heart for our younger entrepreneurs now, because so many of them come home from college now and say to their parents, I've seen the light. I want to go start or work at a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And parents make that universal noise. You know, oh honey, why don't you get a real job? And then, you know, give some of the money back. Because they're afraid. And again, it goes back to fear. And I get it, man. They've been trained to think success looks like this. And I'll tell you, one of the worst successes I've ever seen has been my generation's version. Worst failures I've ever seen has been my generation's version of success. That you are your car, that you are your paycheck. You know, and what you have as a younger generation, and this is an asset for your movement, our movement. There's 100 million young people coming who have been raised doing service in America. And one of the most profound social experiments in the history of the world. 100 million of the richest, freest, most ethnically diverse, technologically advanced generation in the history of the world. You go to any university and ask any freshman class, how many of you all did service? And I guarantee you virtually 100% is going to raise their hand. They're coming out, and I know it's a gross generalization. I hate to do it, but I swear what I see so often is a generation that is so fixated on the idea that can I merge spirituality, lifestyle, income? Can the way I make my money, can the place I spend my money be my philanthropy, not the check at the end of the year? This is a profound shift that we should take full advantage of. Not only for the growing ranks of people who will be wildly interested in this cafe movement, but for the radical new ideas that they will bring that will make some of you in the room say, well, that's not a cafe. That's not the way we do it. You know, I urge you right now to embrace the inevitable moment in which you have to stop and say, wait a second. My idea was crazy to somebody else. I'm never going to tell a young up-and-comer that their idea is crazy. In fact, all of us in this room, our mantra should be, I'm going to make it hard for you, but it's your generation's job to kick my ass. It's your generation's job to challenge everything I did. And I'm going to make it hard for you, but the point is I'm ready for that moment. Now, I got ahead of myself here, and I want to stop because I think there's an arc that I really want to touch on really quickly. In 1946, at the end of World War II, first time in the history of our planet, ever, an army came home and did not go back to the farm. I really want you to let that sink in. That's a profound statement, and it's rarely discussed. You know, the GI Bill, for the first time ever, you know, normally, as we know, rich people declare war, poor people go fight it. And throughout history, poor people had there was a ceiling. And in effect, they went back to what they were doing prior to war. This had never happened before. And this is what's really important to get. A huge number of those young men and some women, they were thrilled. They went dancing down the street. Thank God Almighty, I don't have to go back to that raggedy ass farm. I don't have to work 7 days a week. I don't have to deal with the bank. I don't have to worry about floods and locusts and eking out an existence. It was liberation. Now again, another curveball for you. 10 years later, when Birdseye invented the frozen pea. As crazy as it sounds, this was another liberating moment, because it in effect was saying to a generation of women who were indentured to the kitchen, you have freedom new too. You can go, again, it sounds funny now, but the idea was you can go to the freezer and you can pull out a meal, and that gives you the time to be who you want to be. Now, again, I'm going to take it one step further. Ray Kroc and McDonald's. I know, but I want to get your head around this. When suddenly a generation who suddenly had wealth and income and the ability to travel got in their cars, historically there were only two kinds of restaurants: truck stops and fancy restaurants. And if you were a working person, you know, finding that spot on the road, what McDonald's offered a new generation of people was clean, consistent, affordable food. All these things at their time were miracles. They were workers' dreams come true. There was this notion back then that science was going to liberate us from the eons of sinew and soil connection. This idea that suddenly, again, don't forget, Tang was what astronauts drank. You know, and if you really look at Tang now, it's frightening. It's a wonder they just couldn't run to the moon based on how much sugar was in that. But you get my point, there was faith. We were wrapped up in this notion of science was going to save us. But you flash forward 40, 50 years, and you had the unintended consequences of that. Because what we did is we literally left the agriculture. So often we talk about agriculture. Yeah, I can talk about that all day. I'm fixated on agriculture. What was it like when there was a sense of connectivity? I don't want to romanticize this era too much, because it was Jim Crow and segregation and a lot of other evil things, but nonetheless there was a sense of order. There was a sense of no waste. There was a sense of everybody has a role. You could make a case that many of us in the nonprofit world, what we do is almost we're professional neighbors. We do what family did in a different era of America. So what you have now, and the moment we're in the middle of, is this wild moment where 2, 3 generations later, that generation's great-grandkids are trying to go back to the farm. They're trying to re-explore that sense of connectivity. There's that deeper hunger. That's what we're in the middle of. And that's what I urge you to realize you are part of. That you're not just out there on your own, although it might seem like it at that 2 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep because you're really trying to figure out how am I going to make payroll. And brothers and sisters, I have been there. You know, I went out and I started, after I realized I was going to have to do this DC Central Kitchen, I went out and started it. It was just me in a truck. But using my showbiz background, I was able to call up, and again, dudes, we've all in that position. I just figured they're about to inaugurate a new president, George Bush Sr. It was like a month away. I got my first little refrigerated truck. So I had this truck and me and a dream. So I called up the Republican National Committee and said, dudes, you all look like shit. Do yourself a favor. Give me the food from your inaugural parties. It's going to make you look great. Is there a media outlet in the world that's going to be able to resist food from the inaugurations going to poor people the next day? Well, George Bush Sr. looked like Gandhi has returned. It was like, honestly, it was like shooting fish in a barrel while taking candy from a baby. They went for it, hook, line, and sinker. So on day one, but this is powerful, and again, I urge you to think about this. On day one, that media, I had one of these magic moments where literally media from around the world wanted to cover it. And I had that moment where I thought to myself, now I can take full advantage of this and make it all about me. Or I can take better advantage of it and make it about us. You know, then in effect I realized that while there was an urban myth that you couldn't donate food, that restaurants it was illegal. Restaurants couldn't do that. I knew it wasn't. It never ever has been illegal. But if I get the president to do it, that means anybody could do it. I could open a doorway in my backyard that would open a doorway across America, not just for my organization, but for all. And I urge you to consider that. Now again, I don't want to sound like a saint. I am a lucky mofo. You know, I was born a white man in America, and I had to come up. I came up at a time in which both cable and the internet arrived. And I rode that like a trick pony. I had wild advantages that others didn't have, and I still do have advantages that others do not have, but I'm committed to using those advantages for the larger, greater good. And I urge you to consider that, because when you get media, you know, whether it's your own generated media, the YouTube station you should put together, your Facebook, your Twitter, anytime you get media, I urge you to embrace a metaphorical or a real hashtag, one of many. You know, one of many. I am part of a movement, and I'm a proud member of this movement. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about trends, because this is a big part of what I do. And again, I apologize. The more comfortable I get, the more profane I get. It just works that way. I try so hard. My sainted mother would slap me on the back of the head if she could hear me. To her way of thinking, that's just lazy. And I'm going to be good. I promise I won't utter another profanity throughout the rest of the day, unless you take me to the bar afterwards. When I first started this, there was really no real knowledge about how much food was being wasted in America. Inch by inch, we started to get better knowledge. And we know now that about 40% of the food we prepare every day is thrown away. Half of that's fruits and vegetables. Now, I came up through an arc of time in which prepared food programs opened up all across America. And I was lucky enough to be part of a movement just like yours. And we had our first conferences, and we came together, and we started to spread the word that you could go to a restaurant, a hotel, and cater, you could pick up that food and use it. But more importantly, and more powerfully, you could start to really tap into the power of that food. You know, that you could not only feed people a decent meal, but you could train people. And ultimately, you could start your own businesses. You know, and this was a very exciting time, but, again, this is important. There were trends you could see back then. You know, when I first came into this business, there were only 2 culinary schools of any real merit in America, the CIA and Johnson & Wales. And there were only 2 colleges that really did any kind of hotel restaurant management, that was Purdue and Cornell. Now every community college in America and high schools have culinary programs. Now again, some people might look and say, that's cool, but when I looked at it with dread, because I knew what it meant. I knew that very soon there was going to be an army of chefs armed with the latest inventory controls who were going to come in and rapidly take away the food that this growing network relied upon. And this is profound, because we have a system now, good, bad, right, or wrong. We rely on the stream of food to feed an estimated 45 million people who are at risk of hunger. This is the second level above food stamps. It's the food banks and the pantries. And their food is going away. And sadly, what's left is nutritionally vacant food, right? So the era of prepared food, even though it is still there, it is going to diminish quicker and quicker and quicker. So I mentioned there's an estimated 45 million people who are at risk of hunger. This is the real bomb I want to drop on you tonight. It's been alluded to a little bit earlier. On January 1st this year, stroke of midnight, a few seconds afterwards, the first baby boomer turned 70. And every single morning, 10,000 people turn 70 in America. And that's going to go on for 80 years. It's oftentimes referred to as the silver tsunami. You know, this epic, really profound, and this is profound what's about to happen. There is no precedent in the history of the world, globally, for this many people who are going to live this long. And the reality is a significant portion will not have saved enough money or put aside enough money for the extra years science will give them. So the question is, if the supply of food we're relying upon to feed an estimated 45 million people is shrinking and has significantly less nutritional content, and the supply is going to be growing, and it's not just the typical people we have historically served. The model that many of us see in our communities and might even partner with, the pantries, the food banks, were built in the 1960s and designed for able-bodied people who could come and take something home with them. That's not who's hungry anymore. The face of hunger is a single mom who's working 1 or 2 jobs, and she's got kids. You know, she's doing everything she can to hold it together. And rapidly, it's going to become older people who will not have the physical ability to go down and get this stuff and take it home and cook with it. So this puts upon us a special challenge, but also a tremendous opportunity. And it's that opportunity that took me to Los Angeles, because I know that the future for my business and many of yours, and it's been touched on already, I think in every single presentation, and by the way, those were some amazing presentations earlier. I've heard a lot of pitches in my career, but those were 3 outstanding pitches. So can we give it up? And I think what was also important to really hone in on in each one of those presentations, and it's very much a part of my core ethos, is they all talked about being open source. They all suggested that they would give you whatever they had, and that is a huge, essential part of what we do. We have to be wildly open. Anybody who comes to visit, anybody who wants our information, share, share, share. But I know that fruits and vegetables are the future of the business we're all in. And this is exciting because for a whole new generation of consumers, whether they be poor or rich, local food is the button. It's not so much organic, it's local. So whether you are cooking it to sell in your cafes or using it to serve men and women who are poor, this is going to be a driver. And it's going to be reinforced tremendously by the Affordable Care Act. For the first time, doctors are going to be talking to patients about preventative care, and that is nutrition. And you're opening up a doorway to food as medicine. So in effect, you can make a case that your cafes are the pharmacies of the future. And I urge you to think of them that way. So I went to California, besides having come up in that community and wanting to return a little bit. And I'm going to stop for 1 second. That's another thing I just urge you all to consider in your journey. Because there came a point, people ask, why did you leave DC Central Kitchen? You know, I had been a CEO and a founder for many, many decades, almost 20-some years. And I had built a solid board, a great reserve. The kitchen had produced over 24 years, almost 30 million meals. And it helped 1,500 men and women go on to get full-time jobs, almost 150 in our businesses. We had a $12 million a year social enterprise portfolio. We were earning about 70% of our earned income. There was another program we started called Campus Kitchens that utilized the underutilized school cafeterias in America. And brothers and sisters, I urge you to think about this. You know, cafeterias in schools, in rural communities, community colleges, their potential production facilities or cafes in the future. Think about this. Again, there's an army of young people in these colleges, and that cafe is sitting right in the middle of it. I urge you to think about the existing resources of school-based cafeterias, but there's 50 of those. But I felt that as much as I've done so many talks about leadership, it was time for me to do the same thing that I had asked poor people to do for 25 years, which is to consider a new path. You know, to have the courage to try something new. So I tagged out. It was time for me to split and let other people have their time at the helm of the organization and take it in a new direction. But there's a tremendous business opportunity here. Because what I've done is not only gone to Los Angeles because you have supply, which is an unending supply of fresh fruits and vegetables with a year-round growing season. And by the fact of going out to buy the cosmetically imperfect. This is what we basically hit on in DC in the early 2000s. We started going out to Mennonite farmers in the Central Valley of Virginia and Pennsylvania and offering to buy what they used to donate, but because we bought it, we could turn around and resell it. And we partnered with the Obama administration and the DC government to do one of the, I think still one of the most exciting school food programs in America. So when I left, DC Central Kitchen was doing almost 12,000 meals a day. Half for city shelters and nonprofit partners, half as a revenue generating contract to do locally sourced scratch cooked meals for DC public schools, in which we can employ men and women who graduate from our job training program at 13 an hour with benefits to produce the meals. So beautiful synergy, beautiful synergy. But the point is, I believe the next phase is this Meals on Wheels. Now, Los Angeles is home to the largest concentration of older people living in America. Almost 1.25 million people over 65, 30% of whom rely exclusively on Social Security. And I think for the women in the audience, this is particularly germane because you may have seen just recently the largest, fastest growing unemployed group in America, women over 50. So imagine this. Again, 70 million people getting old, women outlive men. If the largest growing group of people who are unemployed are women over 50, what you're going to see, sadly, are probably women who are going to be racing to 60 so they can cash their Social Security check. They're going to be getting lower wages, and they might be having to take, or lower benefits, and they might be having to care for an 85-year-old parent as well as a 30-year-old kid. This is a real serious issue. So our challenge, we're all kind of on a new quest. How do we feed more people a healthier meal for less money? So what we're doing in LA, and then I'll open it up. I hope I've been semi-entertaining here, but I'll open up. You can ask me anything you want about our business model. The idea with LA was I needed to build a very big processing kitchen because I wanted to basically take any fruits and vegetables I could get either donated, which would fuel the job training program, and a volunteer program, and they would use donated food to make free meals for charitable partners. We would employ graduates, buy food, and then go out and get contracts to do senior meals. Right? Now, the senior meal contract is fascinating because there's the historic place in which these senior meals are served, and these are congregate meal sites, senior centers. You know, interesting sidebar of unintended consequences, and this is important just as a lesson. Demographically, there should be a line down the road and up around the corner of older people waiting to get into every single senior center in America. Demographically, there should be a line. There's not a line. It's freaking the senior providers out because their assumption was, wow, there's more seniors coming, let's make our senior center bigger. The same false idea of there's more poor people coming, let's make our food bank bigger. You know, the idea of without even looking and saying, does this meet the need now? And it just bigger, make it better. What you're beginning to see is the first wave of people who will not self-identify as old. Where they go, what they eat, what they want to be doing while they eat. It's an unwritten thing. We can be part of rewriting a very new construct in which we look not just as how do we feed old people, but more importantly, how do we use food as a way to pull people out back into the community so that they're active, engaged, respected? How do we look at intergenerational? Whether it's using a food program to spur intergenerational after-school mentoring programs, intergenerational gardens that we might buy the product from, to do our cafes that would provide meals for working moms when they come to pick up their kids at a reduced price versus sending them down to the pantry. These are all the things that we can experiment with. But another interesting angle is, just so you know how fascinating the food business is now, I'm partnering with a company, get this, they're a food company, and here's their business model. They contract with local chefs to produce meals. They have an Uber-esque refrigerated truck company that picks up the meals, brings them to us. We sort them, and they're basically for men and women who pick up their meals at their health clubs. So they're paleo diets, they're vegan diets, and they're like $12 a meal. But we package them up for them, really, we wrap them up. And then the Uber company picks them up and drops them off at the sports facility or the health club where the people who bought the meals pick them up. So here's a food company, they have no chefs, they have no kitchen, they have no inventory, but they're making huge profits. See, this is the way we have to start thinking about our businesses. Because we come into this thinking, a cafe looks like this. Does it? A cafe can be whatever we make it. But I started looking at that model and realizing, well, I can contract with the city at a very low profit margin for a traditional senior meal contract. I can serve that same meal instead of $3.90. I can probably go to a senior high-rise where people are fixed incomes, and I can say for 20 bucks a week, I'll give you 5 meals. The price of those 5 meals, then I can take 80 meals to one drop-off and drop them off. I take the profit I make from that small group, which is still a great deal, 20 bucks, 5 meals. That will subsidize not only the break-even, but the free meal we can provide to the community. So in effect, what we're looking at is 3 groups getting the exact same meal. Poor, fixed income, low income. Get my point? This is a fun way to think about it. Just as a little piece of business that I think might be germane to some of you, I built this thing in Northeast LA. It's a 20,000 square foot processing kitchen. I built it with a PRI loan. It's called a Program Related Investment Loan. This is a new toy of the foundation world in which nonprofit organizations can finally get access to credit and capital. This has been the bane of our existence. Sadly, the nonprofit sector, we're not viewed as businesses. We're good deed doers. So we've had to historically go out and raise our money through 1,000 different boorish, antagonist, long-winded kind of things, writing grants, doing spaghetti dinners, finally to be able to get access to capital. Now you have to have 3 years of financials under your belt, but there's a fascinating model I urge you to look at. There's 2 groups, the Nonprofit Finance Fund and RSF, Social Finance, that are actually very interested in making loans to nonprofits. And the idea is these are very low interest, long-term loans, but they're specifically targeted at your kind of businesses and mine. I have been really long-winded, I apologize. I will stop and I will open it up and you can ask me anything you want. Just shout, please.
Okay. Emily, Portland, Oregon, and Chattanooga,
Great
Tennessee.
town. Great town.
Thank you. I'm just going to read what I wrote. What do you recommend to young up-and-comers, and thank you for talking about that, by the way, so comforting, who want to pursue this career but don't have a full college education? Do you have advice on?
I never went to college. As Bob Dylan's saying, man, they don't teach you nothing in school you can't learn on the streets.
What do you recommend for someone wanting to work their way up?
Well, get in the business. Again, I came up the hard way, man, like A-money. I washed dishes. I did everything in that business, and I still do. That's the weird thing, man. I'm 57 now. I started LA Kitchen at 55, and it tore my old ass up. Seriously, my presentation's done, I'm gonna cuss again. It was hard. It was hard. I have not worked that hard in a long, long time, nor have I sweat as much, both physically as well as spiritually, man. There were those scary moments. I am back in the saddle of, oh my God, how am I gonna make payroll? And believe me, I'm bona fide, but I went into a brand new city, and I had people say, I don't think that's gonna work. And it's like, wow, 27 years in, 30 million meals. I've made payroll. I have not missed a payroll in 27 years. And that's seriously bad. Yet, I still found myself having to dance once again. And don't ever think, young brothers and sisters, that you don't have to dance. It's fun to think you'll reach a point, and sometimes you do. I had a momentary run in DC where because of a lot of hard work, I didn't have to sweat payroll. I knew where payroll was going to come from. But again, that's a rare place. Very few people, you don't escape it. And the reality is though, and this is important, man, most people, when they take their last breath, what most people wish? I wish I had done something a little bit different with my life. Every single day, I talk about this, every single morning, 10,000 people look in the mirror and sigh because they see a 70-year-old. And it's not so much that they're 70, it's that they're sighing because they're wondering, how did I get so tricked into thinking if I just bought more junk, I'd be happy. And what I see is an army of people who are turning around to us saying, use me. This is the volunteers you all have. It's the army of people I want to work with. We're saying in effect it's not too late, but as a young person, I urge us that as hard as our roads are, as arduous as the task is of running a cafe, making payroll, managing HR, nonetheless we're doing what most people dream they can do. They're making a difference. You know, Lynn touched on it, many of you all touched on it. In effect, we're all living a wonderful life. You know, because we see people, we see the prodigal children return. You know, we see men and women who society had given up on. You know, and what we get to see is their, in effect, metaphorical resurrection. That sense of, I have a role here. You know, that's one of the reasons that I started creating more and more businesses, is I realized so many of the men and women who went through the program and graduated, what made it function wasn't the school, is that they were part of something bigger. You know, they'll come every day and wash dishes like A-Money. Who's A-Money? Where's A-Money's person? A-Money.
E-Money, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Everett. E-Money, sorry. You know, that's what people were all doing. You know, it's because I love what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I'm a part of something bigger. And that's what, again, this deeper hunger is. But again, young sister, be respectful of your elders, but do not be patient. Do not be patient with routine. And don't ever think that routine won't set in. You know, we've all fallen in love and think it's going to be polka dots and moonbeams forever. And 6 months later, you're like, what was I thinking? You know, love, work, friendships, everything will become boring if you let it. So what you have to do every day is, as much as it's hard sometimes to wake up and go to work, you have to be the one that goes to work excited, because you have to make sure your team really continues to believe in your overarching mission. But don't let routine set in, because it will if you don't work it every day. By the way, years ago, another thing, I went and got this little heart tattooed here on my finger, because as a young man I was very judgmental, and I realized this, it's when I do this now, I'm reminded, dude, don't be a hater. You know, when I was a young man, it's like, oh, it's like, dude, again, most people aren't messed up. They're just lost. They're afraid. Just put it away, meet people where they're at. You know, and that's the power of food, man. That is the power of food. Another question? What time is it? Have I taken up too much of my time?
Oh, we'll tell you. You're okay.
You're good.
15 minutes easy.
Okay.
Linda at Open Table. How do you get started? I mean, I know you just go ask a restaurant for food, for what they've got left over. I guess you have to go at the very end of the day and pick up what's left that they're willing to part with. How do you go about that?
Well, again, approach it, I don't want to get into the business, like approach it like a business, but it is business, because you're going to someone who, restaurant people are the most generous people in the world. They hate throwing away food. It's, you know, that's money for them. And this is a very important part of the business, because we have to recognize that all that leftover food, all the free food out there is lost profit. Whether it's a fruit and a vegetable, whether it's a pizza, it represents lost profit, and it will go away. But the point is, our bag was always, you have food, you don't want to throw it away. Cool. We'll show up in a refrigerated truck and handle it professionally. Our drivers will be certified food handlers. We'll give you a receipt. We'll provide containers. We'll come when it's convenient for you. We will use it to train people for work, not just feed the poor. Now, restaurant people are cool, but they don't want to necessarily subsidize, in effect, the lifestyle of somebody who might be out in front of the restaurant and who they perceive as harassing their customers. You're showing a way that you can get that person out in front of the restaurant through the system that might get them clean and sober, stable housing, job training, in the back door, help them make more money. So it's a very strong business relationship that you can create. But again, it's all about professionally handling the food, because while there are no laws that that preclude someone from donating food, that doesn't mean that if you pull up at 2 in the afternoon in a summer day and put a bunch of prime rib in the backseat of your car, that they're going to be happy about it. They want to see a professional, health code approved alternative to throwing the food away. Now, you can also make the case that you're saving the money for the trash. An interesting way of thinking, I had a young person come from the UK and say, do you do this for free? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, don't they pay the trash company to take it away? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, why don't they pay you half? In other words, you're cutting their trash bill in half. Why don't they pay you to come and take it? And I'm like, never thought of that. You know, but again, that's the point. That's the point, is there's a lot of things. This is why it's important to not have routine. You know, there's a sense of, in fact, I'm in a place now where, having run the DC Central Kitchen, which was a really good nonprofit, in Los Angeles, I'm tempted sometimes to say, well, this is what we did in DC, but it's like, no, I don't want to think that way. I want to be open to all kinds of new ways of thinking. I don't want to fall in that trap of thinking that's what we did it there. It worked there, it can work now. I don't want to do that. Yes? Again, thank you all so much while we're waiting. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a thrill to be here.
This is a personal observation. I don't think there's a shortage of food. I think there's plenty of food. I think it's just a matter of logistics. Getting it to the people that need it and not giving it to the people that know the system. Because
Well,
I've seen it.
I hear you, but I can take you to a whole lot of food banks where they built bigger and bigger food banks that are empty now because there isn't enough food. And what they have to do is go out and actually raise money to buy food to give it away. This is lost profit, sister. It is inevitable. In fact, let me point out another thing. Fruits and vegetables now are something I'm excited about, but every food industry in America is now looking at ugly fruit as a tremendous resource. A good example is baby carrots. Baby carrots were misshapen carrots that a small grower in California realized I can tumble down and make into these little nubs. And they took them to a local store and they're like, forget your carrots, we want the nubs. And they created the whole construct of baby carrots. Campbell's came along, bought the idea, but they take the scraps from the baby carrots and they press it to make V8 juice, which is in effect orange soda pop. But you get my point. Carrots are an example of the way industry is getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And there's all kinds of alternate markets. When I was a young man, there was a huge supply of food left over. But then, interesting enough, there were 2 or 3 very interesting business models that came along. One was the dollar stores that came along and started going to the produce markets and buying all the stuff that was going to be ripe in 2 days, because their model was, we'll sell it tomorrow. You know, again, I've watched over my career a huge amount. Now, you are right. There is tons of food in America. We still throw away a lot, but I just would urge us to recognize that it's going to get harder and harder and harder. We're still in the sweet spot, but I think the message we deliver is that food is more than gas for the body. Food is a revolutionary force. Real quick, and in fact, if you don't mind, I'll be here, we can talk more, but I'm going to close on this because I think this is in my opinion, what drives me the most. There was a guy named Thomas Clarkston. Very few people know about this guy. One of these people you read about in the history books, you're like, why didn't they teach this in school? I would have stayed in school if they taught stuff like this. Thomas Clarkston was a graduate of Cambridge University in the 1700s, who was, by the mere fact that he was in Cambridge, he was the elite. But nonetheless, there was still strata. And there was this one secret golden card, and it was called the Latin Essay Contest. And it was at Cambridge University every year, and if you won, it was the golden ticket, right? So he just wanted to win. Out of nowhere, the subject, it was like 1782, the subject was, is it wrong to enslave a man against his will? Some American Quakers had agitated because of the abolitionist movement, had got the dean or the provost, whatever you want to call it, at Cambridge to put that in there. Wild card. Now, Thomas Clarkston didn't care, he just wanted to win the prize, but in studying, in interviewing slave ship captains, in looking at the insidious triangle between England, Africa, and Jamaica, he started to put it together, and he wrote this essay. He won. And on his way to pick up his prize in London, he got off his horse at a place called Wade's Mill, and he started to pace. Sadly, in learning, in just trying to win the prize, he discovered the issue. And he, in effect, got back on his horse and said, I got to do something about this. And Thomas Clarkston is considered the father of the modern human rights movement. And he launched the first effective boycott in the history of the world, the sugar boycott. And it was the beginning, and it was the sugar boycott that really began and played a huge role economically, putting the squeeze on the people who had an interest in the slave trade. And it was the King of England, the Church of England, John Locke, who wrote The Rights of Men, had an interest in the slave trade. That's what this young, stupid college grad without any knowledge was going up against. And he won with sugar. Gandhi, in India, 350 million people. The British never had more than 2,000 officers ever stationed on the ground in India. Yet they were able to keep 350 million people divided by race, caste, geography, language, and fighting one another. And Gandhi came along and in a beautiful, powerful, metaphorical moment said to Indians, we see Sikhs, we see Muslims, we see Jews, we see Christians, we see things that the British exploit. They just see Indians. The salt. He marched down to the port city of Dundee. Every single day of his 26-day journey, he was promising that he was going to launch a new movement against British occupation. He walked down to the beach, and he reached down and picked up natural salt. It was illegal for an Indian in their own country to pick up salt on the beach. You had to buy salt that was imported from England, but he held it out. And he said, in effect, this is the unifying principle. In this heat, in this country, salt is an essential. The fact that we all have to buy salt means it's a symbol of our united subjugation. There's 350 million people here. If we don't buy it, it will have economic ramifications. If we all pick it up, they can't build enough jails for all of us. More importantly, he was holding that out to the British media, saying, in effect, your comfort is my people's subjugation. Salt unified the Indians against the British, and the notion that you could get the British Raj to the negotiating table with table salt, as crazy as it might have sounded, it worked. You know, Dr. King took the dimes that took to ride in a bus in Montgomery and used it to challenge race in America. Cesar Chavez used table grapes. You know, we come from a long line of activists who have used food to challenge the larger society, to see themselves differently, and to realize they have a role to play. You know, we are in effect followers of those people, but rather than tell people what not to buy, rather than choose the boycott, what we offer people is what I like to call the boycott. The idea that we're saying if you buy our product, you're getting the same results. We're starting to show people that the way they shop every day, that market forces can bring down the mightiest walls of oppression. You know, one of my favorite people, man, Robert Kennedy. When I lived in DC, I'd go to his grave quite often. There's a famous quote on his grave that he gave on a speech in South Africa. And he said, in effect, every time somebody stands up against injustice, they send forth a very small ripple of hope. And from a million different energy sources, those ripples can become waves that wash down the mightiest walls of oppression. When somebody comes into one of your restaurants and says, that person, you know, just paying a little bit, you can't make social change on that. Those are small ripples. And from 1,000 different community cafes in America, we can create an economic current that can wash down the walls of oppression. Thank you all very much.